Sunday morning was supposed to be ordinary. September 5th, 1982. In Des Moines, Iowa, the city was still half asleep. The streets were quiet. Porch lights glowed faintly. The sun had not fully risen. 12-year-old Johnny Gosch stepped outside his home to do what he had done countless times before: deliver newspapers. Johnny was responsible, punctual, independent. His parents trusted him enough to let him work alone in the early morning, hours, something many children his age never did. He pulled his red wagon behind him, filled with newspapers, and began his route. That was the last normal moment of Johnny Gosch's life. Within minutes, subtle details would unfold, details that wouldn't seem important at first, but would later haunt investigators for decades. A neighbor noticed a man talking to Johnny near a car. Another witness recalled seeing a suspicious van circling the block. Someone else remembered a vehicle stopping and starting repeatedly, as if watching. At the time, no one called the police, because nothing seemed wrong. Johnny continued delivering papers, until suddenly, he didn't. When Johnny failed to return home, his mother grew uneasy. This wasn't like him. He was always on time, always careful. She stepped outside and scanned the street. The wagon was there, but Johnny was not. Newspapers lay scattered across the ground, as if dropped in a hurry. Something had interrupted him. Police were called. But in 1982, missing child cases were handled very differently. Officers suggested Johnny had run away, that he might have gotten distracted, that he would come home soon. His parents knew better. Johnny was not the kind of child who ran away. He had plans. He had responsibilities. He had never talked about leaving. As hours turned into days, the realization set in. Johnny Gosch had vanished. And the more investigators looked into his disappearance, the stranger it became. Witnesses came forward with overlapping stories. Different vehicles, different men, different versions of the same morning. But instead of clarifying what happened, these details only added confusion. The trail went cold quickly. Too quickly. Years passed with no answers. Then decades. Johnny's name slowly faded from headlines until something impossible happened. In the mid-1990s, an image surfaced. A photograph. It showed a frightened young man, bound and staring directly into the camera. Beside him, another child. The photo had been taken years after Johnny disappeared, and many believed the boy in the image was Johnny Gosch. The FBI examined it, and what they found was disturbing enough to reopen old wounds and raise a terrifying question. What if Johnny Gosch didn't vanish forever that morning? What if he survived, and someone wanted the world to see it? To understand why Johnny Gosch's disappearance still unsettles investigators, you have to understand who he was before that morning. Johnny was 12 years old. He lived with his parents in Des Moines, Iowa. By all accounts, he was intelligent, polite, and unusually mature for his age. He wasn't reckless. He wasn't rebellious. He wasn't unhappy at home. Johnny was the kind of child parents trusted. That trust is what made his disappearance so difficult to explain. He delivered newspapers because he wanted the responsibility. He liked earning his own money. He took pride in being reliable. He planned ahead. He followed routines. He told his parents where he was going. This is important, because children who run away usually leave signs behind. Johnny didn't. He didn't pack clothes. He didn't take money. He didn't say goodbye. Everything about his life suggested stability. Friends later said Johnny had been excited about the future. He talked about school, about growing up, about normal things a 12-year-old should be thinking about. Nothing suggested he was preparing to disappear. But as investigators looked deeper into Johnny's routine, unsettling details began to surface. Johnny had been approached before. In the weeks leading up to his disappearance, Johnny mentioned to his parents that a man had offered him money to switch newspaper routes. Another time, he spoke about someone asking him questions while he worked. At the time, these encounters seemed harmless. In hindsight, they felt like warnings. Johnny's mother later said something chilling. She believed Johnny had been watched, that someone knew his routine, knew when he left the house, knew he was alone. The idea that Johnny may have been targeted, not randomly, but intentionally, shifted the entire case. Because this wasn't about opportunity, it was about planning. And that realization made investigators uneasy. If Johnny wasn't a runaway, and if his disappearance wasn't accidental, then whoever took him knew exactly who he was. And they knew when to act. As police struggled to build a timeline, one question loomed over everything. Why Johnny? Why a newspaper room? Why that morning? Why that location? The answers didn't come easily. And as weeks turned into months, the silence surrounding Johnny Gosch grew louder, heavier, more disturbing. Because the more investigators learned about who Johnny was, the less sense his disappearance made. As investigators retraced Johnny Gosch's final morning, one thing became impossible to ignore. Too many people had seen something, but none of their stories fit together cleanly. One witness reported seeing Johnny speaking to a man near a car. The man appeared calm, casual, as if nothing was wrong. Another neighbor recalled a van driving slowly through the area, stopping and starting repeatedly. Someone else remembered a different vehicle entirely. Different colors, different shapes, different descriptions. At first, police assumed these accounts were mistakes. Memory can be unreliable, especially after a shock. But as more statements came in, the pattern became harder to dismiss. These sightings weren't random. They overlapped. Multiple witnesses described men who did not belong in the neighborhood, vehicles that seemed to be watching rather than passing through. And most chilling of all, several people believed Johnny had been followed. The timeline was tight. Johnny left his house early. Within minutes, he was approached. And shortly after, he vanished. There was no evidence of a struggle. No screams reported. No sign of panic. That suggested something terrifying. Johnny may have gone willingly, at least at first. Investigators began to consider the possibility that more than one person was involved. That one man distracted Johnny while another waited nearby. That a vehicle was positioned in advance. This wasn't a crime of impulse. It was coordinated. But despite the growing concern, the investigation faltered. Descriptions were vague. License plates were never recorded. Critical hours had already passed. And the case suffered from a problem that would haunt it for decades. No physical evidence. No fingerprints. No surveillance footage. No trace of where Johnny had been taken. As the days passed, leads dried up. Witnesses second-guessed themselves. Memories blurred. And just like that, the momentum vanished. The case stalled. But the silence that followed was not peace. It was the kind of silence that hides something unfinished. Because while the public slowly moved on, Johnny Gosch's family never did. And they would soon realize that the official investigation wasn't the only thing going on. Behind closed doors, a different story was beginning to take shape. One that would challenge everything authorities believed they knew. As days turned into weeks, something unsettling became clear. The investigation into Johnny Gosch's disappearance was losing momentum. Leads weren't followed. Witness statements went unchecked. Critical details were dismissed. Police told the Gosch family there was little more that could be done. That Johnny had likely run away. That time would tell. But time didn't bring answers. It brought silence. Johnny's parents began noticing things that didn't sit right. Tips they shared seemed to go nowhere. Witnesses who wanted to talk were never contacted again. And the questions kept piling up. Why weren't all the vehicles reported that morning being traced? Why weren't federal resources involved immediately? Why did it feel like the case was being quietly pushed aside? The family started doing what the police wouldn't. They investigated on their own. They interviewed neighbors. They collected timelines. They kept records. And the more they uncovered, the more disturbing the picture became. Johnny's mother, Noreen Gosch, became convinced that her son hadn't simply vanished. She believed he had been abducted, not by chance, but by design. As months passed with no progress, The Gosch family grew increasingly vocal. They questioned law enforcement publicly. They demanded accountability. And that's when things became even stranger. Information stopped flowing. Communication broke down. Doors quietly closed. The case wasn't just cold. It felt abandoned. And that realization planted a seed of suspicion that would grow darker with time. If Johnny hadn't run away, and if the evidence pointed toward abduction, then why did the investigation collapse so quickly? And more importantly, who benefited from it staying that way? For years, the name Johnny Gosch faded from headlines. Life moved on for most people. But for his family, time stood still. Birthdays passed without celebration. Holidays came and went. Every knock at the door carried hope and dread. The investigation remained dormant. No arrests, no new evidence, no answers. Johnny Gosch was officially listed as missing, but unofficially, it felt as though his case had been forgotten. Until something happened. In the mid-1990s, more than a decade after Johnny vanished, an envelope arrived. Inside it was a photograph, grainy, disturbing, impossible to ignore. The image showed a frightened young man, bound and staring directly at the camera. Beside him was another boy, younger, visibly terrified. There was no note, no explanation, no return address, but the implication was clear. Someone wanted this photo to be seen, and many who looked at it believed the young man in the picture resembled Johnny Gosch, older, thinner, but unmistakable. The photo sent shockwaves through the Gosch family, and it did something even more significant. It reopened the case. Federal authorities examined the image. Analysts studied facial features. Measurements were taken. Comparisons were made. The FBI didn't dismiss it. They took it seriously, and that alone changed everything. Because if the photo was authentic, if it truly showed Johnny alive years after his disappearance, then the story wasn't about a child who vanished in 1982. It was about someone who survived, someone who was being held, and someone who wanted the truth to surface. The silence had been broken, but what followed would be even more disturbing. The photograph was small, grainy, poorly lit, easy to dismiss at first glance. But the longer investigators looked at it, the harder it became to ignore. The image showed two boys. Both appeared restrained. Their expressions were not staged. They weren't posing. They looked frightened. The boy believed to be Johnny Gosch stared directly into the camera. His eyes were wide, alert, aware. This wasn't a random image. Someone had taken time to frame it. Someone wanted it to be seen. And someone wanted it to be understood. Experts began analyzing the photograph in detail. Facial proportions, bone structure, spacing of the eyes, the shape of the nose. While no definitive conclusion could be reached, investigators could not rule out the possibility that the boy was Johnny, older, thinner, changed by time. That uncertainty alone was unsettling. But what truly disturbed investigators was context. The photo didn't appear to be accidental. It wasn't a snapshot. It wasn't a family photo. It looked like proof. Proof that someone wanted to communicate something without leaving words behind. And then came another chilling detail. The photograph had surfaced years after Johnny disappeared, at a time when interest in his case had nearly vanished, which raised a disturbing question. Why now? Some investigators believed the photo was a message. Others believed it was a test to see how authorities would react. But the most unsettling theory was this. What if the photo was meant for Johnny's mother? What if it was confirmation that her son was still alive? Federal agencies examined the image closely. They consulted specialists. They compared it to known photos of Johnny. And while the FBI never publicly confirmed the identity of the boy, they never dismissed the photo either. That silence spoke volumes. Because law enforcement agencies don't spend time analyzing hoaxes without reason. The photo suggested something far worse than a single abduction. It hinted at organization, control, secrecy. And if the image was real, then Johnny Gosch didn't disappear that morning. He was taken, and he may have survived far longer than anyone ever imagined. When the FBI became involved, expectations changed. Federal agencies don't reopen decades-old cases lightly. They don't analyze anonymous photographs without cause. And they don't continue investigating something they believe is meaningless. Yet in Johnny Gosch's case, that's exactly what they did. Behind closed doors, the photograph was examined again and again. Not just by one department, not just by one expert. Multiple analysts reviewed it independently. They studied facial symmetry. They compared aging patterns. They looked for signs of manipulation or staging. And while the FBI never confirmed the identity of the boy in the photo, they also never labeled it a hoax. That distinction mattered. Because if the image had been conclusively fake, the case would have ended there. But it didn't. Investigators quietly continued following leads connected to the photograph. They reviewed past tips that had once been dismissed. They revisited theories that had previously been considered impossible. The tone of the case shifted. This was no longer just about a missing paperboy. It was about the possibility of something larger, something organized. There were whispers of networks, of coordinated abductions, of children being moved, hidden, and controlled. None of it could be proven publicly. And that was the most frustrating part. The FBI's silence became its own kind of evidence. Because agencies speak loudly when they can close a case. They stay quiet when they can't. Johnny Gosch's mother would later say that she believed investigators knew more than they could reveal, that certain truths were too complex, too disturbing, or too dangerous to be made public. Whether that's true or not, one thing is certain. Johnny Gosch's case was no longer treated as random. It was treated as sensitive. And sensitivity in federal investigations usually means one thing. The truth is not simple. As years passed, Johnny Gosch's case became something more than an investigation. It became a debate. With so few confirmed facts, theories filled the silence, and they could not have been more divided. Some believed Johnny was the victim of a targeted abduction, carried out by individuals who had been watching his routine, that he was taken quickly, quietly, and deliberately. This theory fits the witnesses, the vehicles, the coordination. Others believe the photograph is the key, proof that Johnny survived long after his disappearance, and that his case may be connected to something far more, organized than a single crime. Then there are those who believe the photo was a cruel hoax, that it preyed on a family's hope and reopened wounds that never healed. But here's the problem. Hoaxes usually fall apart. This one didn't. It was examined, re-examined, and never dismissed outright. Another theory suggests Johnny's case is linked to a wider pattern of disappearances during that era. Children who vanished under similar circumstances, often while working alone, often with witnesses reporting suspicious vehicles. That possibility unsettles people the most, because it implies Johnny wasn't chosen at random. He was part of a pattern. And then there is the most controversial belief of all, that the truth is known, but hidden. That certain details have never been released because they complicate the narrative, or because they involve information that authorities were never prepared to confront publicly. This theory divides people sharply. Some see it as impossible. Others see it as inevitable. And decades later, the arguments continue. Because no matter which theory you believe, none of them fully explain what happened to Johnny Gosch. Years after the photograph surfaced, the Johnny Gosch case took a turn that stunned the public. Johnny's mother made a claim that few were prepared to hear. She said Johnny came home. According to her, one night years after his disappearance, Johnny appeared in her bedroom. He was older, different, changed by time. But she believed it was him. She said he told her he was alive, that he had been taken, that he couldn't stay long, and then he was gone. There was no proof, no witnesses, no physical evidence, only her word. To some, the claim was heartbreaking. The desperate hope of a mother who never stopped believing her son was alive. To others, it was something else entirely. A detail too specific to ignore. Because certain information she shared had never been made public. Details about Johnny, about his childhood, about moments only he would know. The claim divided the case more sharply than ever. Skeptics dismissed it outright. Supporters believed it explained the photograph. Investigators refused to comment. And once again, silence surrounded the case. But what troubled many people wasn't whether the story was true. It was this question: if it wasn't true, why wasn't it clearly disproven? No official explanation was ever given. No confirmation, no denial. Just unanswered questions layered on top of unanswered questions. And that left the public with a haunting possibility: that Johnny Gosch didn't vanish completely. That he may have survived. That he may have tried to return. And that whatever stopped him permanently. After decades of investigation, debate, and unanswered questions, one truth remains undeniable. Johnny Gosch never came home. Not officially. Not conclusively. Not in a way the world could accept as final. The case is filled with fragments, witness accounts that don't align, evidence that arrived too late, a photograph that raised more questions than it answered, and claims that defy easy explanation. Each piece feels important, but none of them fit together cleanly. For Johnny's family, the toll has been immeasurable. Time did not bring closure. It brought distance, doubt, and the painful task of living without certainty. Hope became something fragile, dangerous even. Because hope keeps questions alive. And this case is nothing but questions. Why was Johnny approached before he disappeared? Why did multiple witnesses report suspicious vehicles that morning? Why did the investigation collapse so quickly? Why did the photograph surface years later? And why was it never dismissed? Why does the FBI remain silent? And perhaps the most haunting question of all, if Johnny Gosch survived, what stopped him from coming home? Johnny's story refuses to fade because it sits at the intersection of fear and possibility. It challenges the idea that time heals all wounds and reminds us that some disappearances don't end. They echo in every unanswered tip, in every reopened file, in every family still waiting. Today, Johnny Gosch is remembered not just as a missing child, but as a symbol of unresolved truth, a reminder that some stories are left unfinished, not because they lack meaning, but because the answers remain just out of reach. And until those answers come, the mystery remains.